Welcome to my show. A guest here. Her name is Debra Hall. Mrs. Debra, how are you doing, ma'am?
I am very good. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. And also, thank you so much for the time and the opportunity. Firstly, you are an author. You are also a poet from the Racine. Can you please, Mrs. Debra, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Mrs. Debra?
I'm a full-time poet. I was a Spanish teacher in the public school for high school. Um, and I retired last June. So I dedicated full-time to poetry and finished that chapbook that was sitting there waiting for me to finish. The chapbook is my first publication, and it is about a journey through grief and loss that I took 8 years ago. So I started a grief group for other people who had lost spouses, and that group is still going, although I'm no longer facilitating it. It's still going strong.
Very, very beautiful. To be honest with you, when writing poets, it is something that's very tangible and also beautiful. And also, despite the retirement where you left last June, to dedicate yourself to actually bring out a very profound book, is something that is very, very insightful as well, Mrs. Deborah. And that is why I would like to drive to your book, Mrs. Deborah. What the current cannot swallow. Can you please, Mrs. Deborah, discuss more on the book? And do you also plan to write more books in the coming future, Mrs. Deborah?
Well, your second question is easy to answer. Yes, I am working on another book. And the book is really about that journey through when my husband and I took an anniversary trip to celebrate our wedding anniversary to Rome, Italy. My husband got sick on the plane. And so he had to have brain surgery in Rome, and there was a chance that I would have to stay there for a number of months because he could not get the fit to fly status. The doctor signs off on that. So I was there for a month through his brain surgery and then getting him so that he was secured to fly. And then coming back to the United States, kind of comparing and contrasting that the socialized medicine in Italy compared to the US, where he started chemotherapy and radiation immediately after we returned home. And then he passed away 6 months later. So he had something called glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain cancer. There is no cure. So it was through this illness and caregiving, and then his death, and then my later transcendence to a new life. Because I also changed careers. I became a Spanish teacher. I hadn't used my Spanish for 37 years. So I relearned Spanish, went to Costa Rica, and lived there for a summer. So the book is tracing that journey.
Very beautiful. To be honest with you, it's so emotional when you guys have a very happy time to celebrate an anniversary, going to Rome, one of the greatest city in the world, and to have such kind of situation. And more recent month later, the person, your lovely person passed away. Is so much emotional and also give you the drive to actually change a lot of career and also bring out a lot of things you've done today, being a Spanish teacher and also the poet and also the book as well you've written today. It's also a source of motivation as well. And that is why I would like to drive to the perspective of poetry, because poetry often gives language to what feels unspeakable or unspeakable. So, how
Yes.
do you think listeners can try to use poetry or quiet reflection to process emotion they struggle to name, Mrs. Deborah?
That is a very good question. Really, the first thing that grief asks us to do is to tell our story. And we come to it through this shock of having to accept someone's death. But we need to tell a story so that we can integrate everything that's happened into our new being. Really, it is a time of great change, and so poetry can help you tell that story. And it's there's a lot of research that really supports having a grief journal where you are processing everything that's going on. There are basically 6 things that you have to do when you go through grief. There's like 6 stages, and it's really from this book by Alan Wolfelt. So it is accept the reality of the death. That's the early days. It's extremely chaotic and crazy. The second thing is let yourself feel the pain of the loss. The third is remember the person who died. The fourth is develop a new self identity. The fifth is search for meaning. And the sixth is let others help you now and always. So the research that we think is Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, that's really for the person who has passed away. The grieving person has a different set of things that they need to do. And poetry helps us tell our story to ourselves and to others.
Totally agree. Poetry have the sense of, it have this kind of sensibility when someone is actually bringing it out. It gives a sense of reflection and also drives the emotion attached to it. And that is why it is a very, very powerful source to actually tell a story, to actually bring out messages to people to understand it more better. And that is why, as you said, regarding the list of things that we can also do to also help ourselves regarding the point of grief, I'm also using it as a source for us to actually tell our stories and also a source of healing is also very, very beautiful and important as well. And that is why I also like to drive to the point where grief doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes grief come unexpectedly. Sometimes grief come in a time whereby we are not even prepared at all. It often lives in the everyday life that we find ourselves. So, how do you think listeners can try to learn to recognize and also tend to the quieter forms of mourning in their own lives, Mrs. Deborah?
Yes, that is a very good question. Um, so those six needs of mourning, they come loudly, they come really loudly in the beginning. The second phase of grief is that middle phase where um, it's not as intense, probably after the first 6 months. So really, that middle point can go 6 months after the death up until 2 years or 3 years later. Some people even have it longer. But during that time, you can recognize and tend to those quiet signs of grief. They don't always set you back to like a place of crying or deep pain, but that grief journal can be a great comfort, and poetry can be a great comfort. I know I love the book, The Widow's Crayon Box of Grief, and it was poems that where she found the author Molly Peacock found color in everything that about this situation. So she didn't find herself in a colorless place. She found herself in a place full of color, and she identified it. And I think that was her anchor point that helped her heal and integrate and return to life stronger and more resilient.
Shows the sense and the power of poetry. It shows how the list also attach and also shows the sense of reflection and also a source to personal growth and also healing as well to help us become more stronger and also have the sense of emotional attachment. And that is why you also in your book, which is what the current cannot swallow, you also try the best to write about the aftermath of survival. So, what do you think life after crisis really look like? And how do you think listeners can also give themselves that permission to move at their own pace, Mrs. Deborah?
That's a good question. It is extremely chaotic in those first days, in those first months, and it's an awful reality of death. So really listeners, I think sometimes from reading poetry or reading books that talk about what is normal in these days, um, it's not being afraid to say, oh my gosh, these emotions are way out of my control. I don't know what to do. If you have words to say, I'm feeling anxious right now, and having some tools. I know on my website, www.poetdebra.com, I have 3 practices that help with that survival, that quiet, that chaotic time, and through the middle point, and then to kind of find to that place. The third stage is really to move towards some new normal. So I have 3 practices, if listeners go out to my website, they can download that 3 practices to deal with grief. And I hope that they find that helpful.
Sincerely appreciate the website will be added to the description. And that is the beauty. When we have the sense of practices, as you said, they are also a way that can also help us in a very, very huge way to give the sense of deeper healing and also help ourselves as well to actually give that sense of reflection so that we can be in a position whereby grief, which always come at times, will be a source of also light as well. And also poetry, which we said also will also sound as a sense of reflection towards healing and also making us to feel whole again. And also, I would like to drive into 2 things: love and loss. Love is one thing on its own, and also loss is also another thing on its own, and it also often coexists. And how do you think listeners can try their best to allow both to be present without feeling like one cancels out the other? That is one, like love doesn't cancel loss or loss doesn't cancel love, Mrs. Deborah.
Yes, I did bring one of my poems today. I'd like to share how I look at love and loss. It is called Legacy. It's about the morning that my grandson was born after my husband passed away. It was 2 years after. It's called Legacy. On the morning of the day a grandson was born, a sliver of new moon rose among twinkling stars, a portent that something was on its way. The day before, it had rained so hard the river overran its banks, covered walking trails carved by many feet, places where I could traverse jagged routes of tree roots and rocks. Yet on that day, the water moved to tributaries, submerged, muddy but usable. The current pushed branches along the bank, long limbs braided like the arms of children wrapped around your neck as you swam them out to the raft. I drag a finger along the surface of the water, carry grief and joy in a body where love and death are still at war. Yet love remains the stronger ally. Someday I will take my grandson to the place where the dam breaks the river into 1,000 small streams. We will find your spirit there, and he will know your name, Grandpa. So that is about love and loss, how they sometimes are at war and sometimes they are at rest. But that was when they were at war.
Very beautiful. It shows the two of them and it shows how they often, coexist. And it shows that despite the love and also the loss as well, they actually feel like they are actually detaching, but they still feel that sense of texture around it. And that is how powerful poetry can be. And if we can give the sense to actually give the deeper reflection, we see a very, very, very bright meaning in those little things you've actually said earlier. And we feel the sense of happiness and also understand better, despite the story, how it can be spoken in such a very little word as well. And also, I would like to drive to the point of objects and also rituals as well. Because despite the life we find ourselves, there are a lot of objects and also some certain rituals that we can do to ourselves that can also help us regarding the perspective, also helping us in perspective of poetry and also helping us in personal growth and also healing ourselves as well. A rosary, a permanent, a Hail Mary on a window carry deep meaning in your poems. So, how do you think listeners create or notice personal rituals that actually help them hold memory and love, Mrs. Deborah?
Yes. On my website again, one of those three practices is really yoga, which is powerful in moving the grief through the muscles. I went to yoga from the early days. I still practice it today. And in those early days, as we did different yoga poses, I could feel the grief being like almost like a washcloth being, squeezed out of me. And then I would be finished with my yoga practice, and I would the mat would just absorb more of that grief. So I think that yoga can be a very effective ritual, as well as having a grief journal where you're writing down, feelings. I am very fortunate that my publisher, Right Where We Belong Press in Canada, she facilitates a writing community called the Art of Loss. So listeners on again, on that resource, the three practices of grief, I have a link to her website so that listeners can be part of that group. They meet once a month, and they meet through Zoom. So it's very accessible through our international community. And there is financial aid available. There is a fee for being part of the writing community, but my publisher, Mary Simmerling, she's the best woman that I've ever met. She does help with financial assistance for people to participate.
Very, very beautiful. And that's just the vulnerable. That is the one thing that she feels she can actually do to make people to be impacted and also have the source of personal growth and also healing as well. So it should not also be a source of burden because love is very important and also memories. These little things that you said, written communities and stuff like that are really, really helpful in the perspective and also your website as well, which are more details in this perspective. I also like to drive for those who feel really disconnected from traditional grief language. How do you think poetry offer an alternative way to sit with pain and healing, Mrs. Deborah?
Yes, I think telling this, it goes back to that really important need to tell the story. So, reading poetry helps us find words or find metaphors. Metaphors can be powerful, um, because where there might not be words, like a listener might be feeling like, I don't know how to identify this feeling. Metaphors have a way of comparing to other things that we do know and we can access, to compare it to. Like if you say grief is like a snowstorm. We're in Wisconsin right now. We're in the middle of a snowstorm, and sometimes grief feels like that polar vortex that settles upon the Midwest, and nobody goes outside, and we feel that closeness to how fragile we are. We go outside and our skin is immediately cold. And if we're out there a long time, the skin will get frostbite. So you comparing it to things that you can access helps you tell your story in a very powerful way.
We do know grief is not easy. It is not an easy thing to pass through. It's a very tough process that really takes lots of time to actually get to recover from such situation. But it also brings us to the light. How poetry can be a source to healing. How poetry can also help us to lift us up from this pain and healing. How powerful it is. How we can also try our best to recognize it more better as also a source to also make us to be able to tell our stories, to tell what is bothering us, to tell people how it is, and for them to actually reflect on the words you actually brought out. It shows how powerful it is. And I sincerely appreciate the beautiful insight you brought in the perspective on this area, and also how it can also improve people's life as well. And also, Mrs. Deborah, there is a question I normally ask during the end of the show, Mrs. Deborah. From our forefathers, from our ancestors, there are a lot of beautiful things that do exist, during our ancestral time that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Deborah, what do you think that thing will be, Mrs. Deborah?
This is called syrup, and it's about being lost and being found. That I know the first death, my husband's death, really helped me with my parents' passing, which happened 3 years after my husband passed away. So being lost in grief and then going through it helps you to be stronger for the next one. And I also feel like my ancestors speak to me. My grandmother, she had a situation similar to mine. She was widowed at somewhat of a young age, at 58. So she lived half of her life with her husband, and the rest of her life as a widow. And so thinking about what my grandma still might be telling me at this phase of where I'm at as a widow, it's comforting. She speaks to me. She left me all of her poetry books, so I'm going through them and reading them. Um, but I think that this poem speaks to being lost and then being found. Syrup, a single sentence, a single word, a single awareness may turn life over. And while you may not yet be found, you are no longer lost. And that was from an author that I loved. Her name is Paula Darcy. You can lose a fear of time if you rise with dawn. Let dusk burnish your skin to amber. You can gather strength in darkness. Let it touch but not take you. On a fall afternoon, you remember the maple tree, the sugar coursing in its arms, and you tap the tree, start a fire, boil the water down. A bubble rises through thick sap to offer proof that joy is lighter than sorrow. On a spring walk, you wonder where people go when they die. As you rest in the sun, as it gilds each bee in search of nectar and tiny seeds you never noticed before.
Wonderful. It shows you said it's all, grief at times will come, but it actually always makes us stronger for the next one. When the next one comes, we are always strong enough to actually deal with the situation. Just like what you said earlier from your husband down to your parents, it makes you be in the position whereby you've passed through it, you've recovered, and now I think this can actually just be like left over. And also from the beautiful poem you've write, shows the sense of grief and how we can actually recover, and also the sense of reflection as well to help us to be more reliable and more stronger in the life we find ourselves. I also want to use this opportunity, Mrs. Deborah, to thank you for the time, the opportunity of making people understand how powerful poetry can actually be a source of light to us. For them to understand how it can be a source for us to also tell our story. It is not about going out or doing it. We can also do it through a source of poetry. Thank you so much, Mrs. Deborah.
Thank you, Temitope. This was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too, Mrs. Deborah. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Deborah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.